not a secret that there have been some complications in how the 13 within the coalition reached where they are now. And I think this is a natural evolution for a group of independent minds reaching parliament together and faced with such a big task, which is representing the largest protest movement in Lebanese history, entering one of the most complicated parliamentary systems known to man, faced with expectations, pressure, and principles. And I think this is a very natural outcome. So I'm not going to point fingers. This is not a personality test. This is not, it's not a personal issue. It's more trying to see it from your side. Is this one of natural evolution in your mind? Do you see this as a fait accompli, given all the difficulties inherited with this task?
Mm-hmm.
Or, in your mind, are there mistakes that have been made in the last 5 months or so that you could actually say, well, we should have done a few things differently? And if you could focus in as much as you'd like, that would be great. But again, it's not personal. It's more just an honest exploration.
Well, thank you, Ronnie, first for having me. I've been eager to do this too with you. I love watching your podcast. So I think what was happening in the 13, we have to give it some kind of context, So to start with, the idea of facing the establishment forces, united, was a kind of prerequisite for any how do I say this? Approval by the Lebanese people to push through and give confidence and trust to.
Yeah.
And this idea of unity has been lurking around for quite some time. And it's very reasonable and understandable that the people know how powerful these establishment powers are, and at the same time know that our means and political tools are not as strong as those.
Right.
So for you to be able to face and deliver, you need to unite. This is a kind of very basic equation to face. And despite the differences, despite sometimes non-political alignment, political non-alignment, despite different ways of approaching politics, and despite all the different backgrounds, people still required that we need to be united. And this is, as I said, something understandable. We achieved this as much as possible during the last elections and the united lists and coalition lists. And this continued after our success in reaching parliament.
Yeah.
So all those differences were carried through, brushed under the rug, as we say, or the carpet. And at some point, things had to show.
You're the first person who's explained it to me this way. It's the same problems with the list formation that finally found their way in parliament, but more visible and more pressure applied.
Yeah. And I think, we all understand that. We all recognize it. We all acknowledge this. But we thought somehow that we would work it through. We did work it through, and many times. But now, with more pressure and with more complications and more of the economic meltdown and the pressure of the people and the pressure to deliver, and the sense of responsibility that we have, it somehow produced different directions. And these different directions, I can summarize them as one that two main different approaches. I think in terms of the broad line of political objectives and identity, there aren't much. And there are some differences, of course. But it's not the real problem. It's the way you approach politics and how you can navigate that landscape and yet deliver to the people. And when you put all the equations together, it becomes very evident that you have very how do I say, the very limited approaches to it. So you can really summarize them in two. And one, what I would say, which is saying that we need to be pragmatic.
Yeah.
We need to deliver. And we need to take advantage of the weight of the 13 MPs that we have and do all the kind of political maneuvers between the traditional political parties and try to create some kind of breakthroughs, trying to create some kind of disturbance or turbulence in the status quo that they have in between them, trying to affect or influence the power equations in between them and so on in different milestones. Okay, which I think, in my opinion, versus the other, and now we can evaluate.
Sure.
Do you want to ask a question?
No. I liked you were taking me there naturally, so I'm glad you're doing it.
Yeah, right. Yeah. The other would say, okay, so we have certain given, and we need to acknowledge first what kind of strong points that we have, and what kind of weaknesses we have before we navigate through these traditional powers. So, and somehow the kind of cohesiveness that we have within the bloc, the kind of different approach to politics, the kind of different backgrounds, and there are some political non-alignment somehow, we can say this, and all this, okay, for me, and the how, underestimating the traditional political powers is also another issue. I mean, when you put all these together, you find that the first approach, at least for me, was a bit theoretical, a bit ambitious, not taking into consideration the challenges that you have already internally and externally. Okay, on paper it looks perfect, but when you start putting in the ingredients and you put in all the details, then the picture becomes more complex, and at the end I find it negating the objective that it was initiated for. And this is when I said, okay guys, so let's try a more calmer approach, more real opposition work.
I think you have the perfect voice to take the temperature down. And I can imagine you're trying to send some reason when there's a very dynamic debate.
Yeah.
And I can imagine you playing that role before things became a little more visible, let's say. But can I pick your brain on, you said something a little earlier about the pressure to unite, that this is almost like a textbook sort of strategy and how to play politics the way it's understood. Do you think there was more pressure on the voter for these 13 to unite? Or do you sense that the 13 had this built-in pressure already, that they sensed their role as needing to unite, regardless of whether or not that may have not happened the way everyone thought it would happen?
I think it's somehow both. We all acknowledge, the 13, the value of the 13 being together, of coming together, in terms of having an impact in the parliament, and having a voice that's heard. At the same time, the people were as well very eager to see the 13 together.
And I sense there's a lot of real pressure there, wanting to see it happen.
Yeah, media, it was a bit mainly driven by media.
Yeah.
And media were somehow tapping into the people ambitions to have these 13 together.
Yeah.
Because for them, this is the recipe for delivery.
Yeah.
So it's all connected.
Yeah.
It's all connected. So you see, this kind of 13 framework, it happened maybe organically. Okay, it happened maybe by media. It happened. There is a lot of value in the 13. Of course, this is something we cannot deny.
Even the number was staggering when it happened. I think a lot of people were happy.
And there were some suggestions to expand or maybe, and this is something that was considered at one point in time. So this is something that was set, and we had to coexist in this framework for quite some time. But I think that somehow the divergence became more clearer in how to approach this presidential elections milestone.
Well, if you were to look back a bit and try to find that marker of where things they got a little heated to the point that we all knew that there was sort of an internal dynamic happening, would you point the finger at Baabda? Was that in a way the last sort of attempt before things became more fractured? Or is it pre-Baabda that you see this as sort of from day one? Because I like that you mentioned the list formation complication, sort of entering parliament right away. So just from your independent sort of lens, do you think of it more as May 15, it was written on the wall, or maybe Baabda is sort of the last attempt?
I can't really put a marker to this. I think it happened, some sort of a accumulation over time. It's normal, and I think if we want to really address this issue, we need to consider all that has happened before, and really start looking forward to a framework that takes into consideration these the experiences that we went through. So there isn't yet, I think, a formula for that, but we'll see. We'll see how we can.
And I promise we will leave this topic. It's my guarantee. But I just there's two more things I want to explore about it. What's sort of been spilling out is this sort of two choices really of simple voting by majority or consensus. But I'm guessing it's more complicated than that.
Absolutely.
And I'm going to even guess that not everyone is hell-bent on one. You can almost marry them together when needed. But is that where the mechanism is right now, in trying to make it work better between those two choices, or is it more than that? Because you're kind of refreshingly straightforward and honest with the way you talk in general about what's happening. So I think if there's anyone to ask, it's you. Just sort of a very objective lens.
Right.
Is that really, at the end of the day, what's happening, that's trying to make them work together, or is it more than that?
I think the mechanism of decision making has to be, or goes hand in hand with the kind of framework that we're going to be proposing. So if we would like to see a bloc, like the regular political bloc of a traditional party, of course you would need a kind of decision mechanism, because in those blocks you don't need to have a decision mechanism. In the traditional blocks, you have the political leader who sets the pace and decides, and at the end of the day the bloc implements some way or somehow, with
some divergence but not much.
Absolutely. So from that, of course, at the end of the day, but you have to take into consideration that the traditional political blocs, they belong to political parties who are already politically aligned. And it's how they signed up for it. They already agreed to be part of this political agenda. So for having said that, I think the starting point is to have political alignment on the objectives and the approach. Because this is very critical. And but we should also be very careful in how to, I need to mention this, in how to manage our expectations. I think a lot of
expectations among the 13, not us.
No,
not the voters.
From outside.
From outside.
Because I think, objectively speaking, a lot of expectations have been put on the 13, and this is fair. And this is fair because we understand that people are frustrated. They want a fast solution to so many problems that we're going through. But somehow you feel that the bar has been pushed even higher. And I think this is not innocent.
Higher on the 13 than the rest of the parliament.
Of course. Despite us knowing that this is a very new bloc, We don't have political infrastructure supporting as a single political party.
Yeah.
We don't have the sufficient resources and so many other aspects, that can limit a lot the performance, which is something I'm not trying to escape responsibility. I'm just describing,
I share that sentiment too. Sometimes I feel like I've met so many of the 13, and that you can't ask them to solve forget the bigger problems, day-to-day issues. The paralysis is so deep.
Yeah.
You can't have superpowers from day one anyway.
Right.
So I do feel bad sometimes where you see many of the 13 tired, trying, and hard to admit sometimes that they're shackled.
Mm-hmm. Shackled, yeah, maybe. But shackled, maybe it goes back to what you expect, what's expected, Back in the day when we ran for the election, I was very clear, myself, during the campaign.
Yeah.
If we win, we're going to be a minority in the parliament.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? Don't expect us to do a lot to the parliament, not just because we're a minority, because it's their playground. Maybe Berri controls the parliament, and the political parties. They will not, and they will do everything in their power not to give us any credit or not to allow us to deliver anything that is that would give us a kind of achievement that we could sell as something we did for the people, and this would feed into enlarging our movement altogether. So this is something they will fight for against. So going back to the expectations, raising the bar and raising the expectations of the 13 in general, I think, and I said this many times on TV actually, this is a recipe for disaster in terms of public opinion.
Yeah.
It's something very how do I say this, very
it's
rewarding, and it's very
yeah.
It's very rewarding to see that people are expecting from you so much. This is very this is something very nice, But at the end of the day, when you cannot reach that bar, then people will be very harsh on you, and because we are responsible people and we take responsibility of what we do. So I think the starting point is really to see what kind of what are we expecting of these 13. Okay, have they been performing according to what they have in terms of tools, resources, many aspects. I know that many of the people don't. The people are not responsible for that. It's their right that we try and deliver. But I have to be also very frank and honest on how this, and lay it in front of the Lebanese people so they have a fair judgment.
Not to go, I'm not going to bother you anymore with this issue except from hindsight, and I'll take it a few years back and see whether or not this applies. This, the way you describe it as the context, I think, is important, and starting this political movement really in 2015, 2016 as a local enterprise at trying to hold politicians to account. For me, a lot of the aspirations that I still hear, that I think some of the 13 really hold on to, it starts with the U-Stink movement.
Mm-hmm.
And within that, I think, is this bottom-up way of approaching politics, that certain things you can't compromise. And there is a system that is inefficient, and a system that needs to be more than reformed, needs to be fixed. And fixing it is a very long and difficult challenge. And I think that is representative of the more, I don't know if Puritan is the right word, but there's a rawer nerve, I think, of those that started their journey earlier. And there are maybe other currents within that are more, it's not pragmatic, but more maybe open, but that has a positive tone to it. It's not that either. It's more playing politics as usual. I think that's maybe a fair way of describing. And I'm going to speculate that your path is more from the former. That there are certain things you simply won't do. And if you did them, I think I would see you resigning before you actually were forced to make those decisions. So there's a principle that is intact. And I think that's actually the right kind of politics. And for me, that actually shows leadership, which I think a lot of the voters maybe want to see now. And I think it's beginning, that there is leadership even when it's not fully aligned. Now, with that, I'm going to sort of go into other terrain. Let's assume that certain restructuring is not possible and that you may see more than one bloc emerging, or you may actually have a new bloc that is majority, but it's not 13. It could be 11, 10, whatever. But let's say the 13 as we understood them are no longer 13. This next phase in Lebanese politics, and we can go with the most pressing, the most talked about issue. Michel Moawad left yesterday. Today's his final day, technically. Tomorrow,
thank goodness.
Thank goodness. There's no president tomorrow.
Right.
And I'm not going to bother you with the whole Michel Moawad versus Aissam Khalife stuff. I'm going to ask you in a bigger, broader sense. Do you think it's inevitable at this point that even with the best intentions of what's left of the 13, that unfortunately there will be some form of consensus that is not good for reform? And I'm going to offer two options here. One is the often discussed, I think it's discussed now every minute on TV, inevitable conclusion that Joseph Aoun enters power, which I don't think is necessarily true.
I agree.
Or something that may not suit reform, or the 13 at least, and that it's a compromise candidate that's not really what the 13 want. That's almost pseudo-civil society. It's selling civil society short. That it's a conduit to perhaps Gibran Basir in 6 years. So I know that's throwing a lot on your plate, but is that a fair way of seeing where things are moving? And if it is, how would you play your role in Parliament accordingly? And if I'm wrong, tell me I'm wrong, because I sense you're far more intimate with the details of all of this stuff. But I see it kind of lining up on those two roads. And I don't want to end up on those two roads. I'd rather have the right road, which is something I don't see yet. This is harder than 13, right? I was being extra nice.
I'll try. Okay. I was waiting for this.
I have to challenge at some point. No, I'm joking.
Listen, Ronnie, I think
the end of the episode.
So, again, going back to the number game in the parliament.
Yeah.
So let's assume we have still 13.
Yes.
All right. There's a lot of narratives on media saying that the 13, if they would align with the traditional opposition, they would be able to create some kind of breakthrough. And for me, this is totally false. No, because by numbers, for you to have quorum, you need 86 to be present.
The first round, yeah. Absolutely.
And the second round, actually. The second round.
Yeah.
Which is more important. Because there were the simple majority.
Yeah, exactly.
So having the 86 for the second round would require that the two camps in the parliament be present somehow, or at least partial.
Yeah.
Okay. Because no one has more than 60 something. Okay.
Right.
So which would lead to the following equation. Who is the candidate that can guarantee a quorum? And this is where the consensus happens.
Yeah.
Or the intersection, let me not call it consensus. Okay. So the challenge that we were trying to do, and starting from that understanding, okay, and reading of the landscape in the parliament, is that we push for a presidential initiative, what we call the presidential initiative, and push for criteria and vision that we would want the president to adopt and adhere to. So, and
this
by
is
that,
the previous tour. If
Yeah.
you will. Yeah.
and I think that was something really good in terms of the local politics that was not precedent. It was unprecedented.
Yeah.
We tried to localize more that election, make
Yes.
it more transparent, pushing for more engagement with the public in terms of candidates and who's running and the dynamics and what's expected and all the discussion that happens around the president's vision and the president's approach. And
there was
how
even positivity in the air at some point. I do recall some meetings where the echoes were actually good. That there was a process being formulated.
and it was working somehow.
Yeah.
Although it was a bit
Long.
it was challenging again.
Yeah.
And again, we are not working in an island environment, you know.
Yeah.
There are always all sorts of things happening
Yeah.
from the traditional powers,
Yeah.
affecting your process. And I think with all the names for the candidates that we have considered and everything that we have included in terms of potential candidates and criteria and meeting with the candidates and, just trying to formulate an opinion of who would be our best candidate. It turns out that it's not, it was even more difficult when things got really serious and started to engage the other blocs around.
Yeah.
And then you would see that the other blocs, which is fairly required that they have their input on the names, on the candidates, input on the program or the vision, and it started to get more complex and sluggish. So, having said that, I think going back to what can be done with this, I think it's already the margin of our influence in that regard is limited to influence really the kind of breed that you'd want for this president. Yeah.
In your mind, is that why there was?
It's not like we're not giving up or anything.
Yeah,
but I'm just realistically describing.
No, actually, you're in just pure numbers. You're right. That in itself is the biggest stumbling block. There's no natural majority, regardless. You will not get 85 tonight if you wanted 85, and that problem is going to stay. But do you think that's why a little more bolder names were chosen that were unusual? Is that why certain names sort of sprung up out of nowhere? Was it from that lens that we know that there are limitations, but we're going to play our role anyway? And hence a name like Haysam Khalifa shows up. Because I think that caught a lot of people off guard. It caught him off guard too, actually. We all heard that.
No, that's not very accurate.
No? Okay.
No. That wasn't very accurate.
Okay, you're right. No, I'll say it differently. Within 48 hours, maybe, his name was circulating. But I don't think anyone was really thinking of that name, at least the week before.
Right.
Is that part of we can flex our muscle because we have to at least show that we're doing the right thing? Is that where that kind of initiative comes from?
It's not flexing muscle, actually. It's really, it's how this initiative evolved and the kind of obstacles that we were facing, pushing through with that, and the lack or total unresponsiveness of the blocs, the other blocs to this initiative. And at the end of the day, you are trying to come with 2-3 names of potential candidates, and you get no response from the from the other blocks, and then you'd say, okay, so if these names, which I've already like kind of represents the initiative, but they are not really the full reflection of my political identity.
Yeah, right.
So why wouldn't I go back
Yeah.
to what truly represents my political position?
Is that a very, very ethical and honest way of saying that there's no need for me to vote for somebody like Michel Moawad? I have somebody that better represents my views. Is that really that's yeah, you see it. I'm not trying to make it about Michel Moawad wala about
Yeah,
Assam
I
Khalifa.
understand.
Yeah,
I understand.
more like you can vote for Assam Khalifa, therefore you will, because he matches more of what you stand for.
Exactly.
Then I'm going to be very careful and cautious and try to play devil's advocate with somebody I admire.
I'm all for it, man. Go
Okay,
ahead.
good. As long as I don't ruffle the feathers. And I've asked this question in different ways to almost everyone that's been on the podcast in the last maybe 2 weeks, 3 weeks. And I get a range of views on this, so I'd like to hear it from you. I'm personally I don't think Michel Moawad has superpowers. I don't think he's perfect. I think his politics pre-October 17 is problematic at times. I think he's not the first person I would think of as a president that represents me. And I'm being very assertive here. I can imagine, I know people that I would want to see in Baabda before him. People that are not running. But I know Michel Moawad enough as a politician to say that this guy he's curtailed anyway. And I also know, and you're absolutely right, the numbers are not there to bring in somebody who's perhaps more reflective of change.
This adoption of candidate and running, and while they know the fact and the numbers, it tells you about their strategy.
Yeah, exactly. So in a way, it actually burns Michel Moawad's name too in the process. Because I think it can burn his name to the point that we're adjusting now for something that's more consensus but not good.
He knows what he signed up for.
Okay, but let's say that's true. Let's say all of that is a fair, accurate reflection of where we are. And of the 13, whether it's Salim Iddi or for a second Salah Hnain or Assam Khalifa for that very short window, that none of those names were going to be the ones anyway. So there's, in a way, none of these names are going to make it, as far as we know, given the context that we're in. Is there any advantage to stepping back 2 steps here? It's not even knowing that Michel Moawad won't make it, but that there at least is a moment where a wide and very diverse group of parties and independent MPs that don't necessarily want to sit together on legislation issues, forget Baabda, but that they're all signing up for somebody who would at least nominally represent the alternative, knowing that the numbers are not there. And the reason I'm framing it this way, I'm not saying if it's right or wrong, I'm just framing it in a way that I still see the army or pseudo consensus, pseudo civil society choice as the inevitable despite anyone's effort. And I don't know if it's productive to have that immense fracturing while this is happening. But maybe I'm seeing it the wrong way. So that's how I've read the situation since the names were being floated. So is there anything you can add to that? Maybe tell me I'm wrong in certain ways, or.
And yeah, I think it's not wrong how you're framing it. It's just some missing, some background there or some elements. So okay, so it's true that there is some kind of diversity or different parties that are like naming, like I said, representation for them in the parliament as candidates. But what we're missing here is why this is happening.
Yeah.
Why is this happening now?
Yeah.
Because there are so many political parties who are really holding their cards close to them yet, close to their chest, They don't want to reveal. They are intentionally not revealing. That's why these sessions for electing presidents have become like a folkloric.
Yeah.
To be honest, it's a bit it's hard to say, but it's the truth. Unfortunately, this is a very important milestone in our especially in these times.
Yeah.
But, and I've said it so many times, these political parties are totally detached from the people needs, from people aspirations, from what's happening with the people now, and the need to push for a new president so we can have the wheel running again and really get engaged in these reforms and all what people are requiring at this moment. So it is, I think, very irresponsible. I think it's very abusive of the Lebanese people, and I think that we should be trying to face that. However, the context that I mentioned and the geopolitical context as well, because we have to also take that into consideration. Many of these powers are, whether we like it or not, are attached to a lot of geopolitical axes and players, and these influence, especially that we all know, for any president to come now, in this particular point in time, they need some kind of green light for financial support. Otherwise, nothing will happen. So this would, and accordingly, this requires involvement or green light from geopolitical players. So right now we're in a kind of stagnation, and everybody in the parliament is somehow waiting for someone to initiate the process of this creating an intersection between them.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, someone would expect these political parties during the past 2 months would have started some kind of dialogue. They have started some kind of exchanging names, but no one wants to open their cards yet. They just have some kind of mutual vetoes on different.
So in a way, you're hinting that there still is that third option there. It just hasn't really shown up.
It could.
Because I like you said intersection. It's almost like these two. I like the way you're describing it, that the intersection hasn't appeared.
It can be a consensus and it can be an intersection. We hope it would be an intersection because somehow the consensus, I feel, would really tone down a lot what we expect from a president.
In a bad way.
Of course.
Yeah.
I think what we should aspire and hope for is to push for an intersection on a president that has bare minimum vision and determination to push for, especially for political reform, not just economic reform.
May I ask you, when you hear the word consensus, I hear national unity, and both are ugly to me. And I'm sorry, I'll explain this better. Not has nothing about you. It's not about you. It's about the way the words are used in on TV. Yeah. I think actually maybe I've read an article where you mentioned this once. National unity is a big part of the problem, and it brought us to where we are. The word sounds so nice. It has this positive ring to it. National unity to me is forced paralysis. Consensus
in government.
In government, yeah, not in.
Well, because the president, of course, I'm not for the kind of consensus that, and that's why I said it would tone down. The profile. Of the president, more. How do I say this? Grayish.
Right. But is there like a? Do you hear it in the background when you think of a consensus pick? Does any of that national unity experience creep in when you're thinking about it? Because for me, I do.
I think you're it's fair that you have this concern.
Okay. Yeah.
It's absolutely fair.
Mm.
Because at the end of the day, if I have like someone who's not willing to really discuss Hezbollah's arms, we have a problem. This is the elephant in the room, and we need to really start discussing that. We need a president who is willing to discuss this in a very straightforward and open manner, very seriously, because we need to reach a solution. We cannot continue like that. This is not sustainable. So if you get someone with a consensus, maybe this would be just ruled out of the equation. And this is, for me, is a problem.
Yeah.
This is one aspect of it.
Yeah.
Or you find another president who is ready to compromise on economic and financial reform.
Right.
And that's another problem.
Yeah.
So we cannot accept a president under the title of a consensus who would compromise on the big issues that our country need to resolve. We need leadership, we need clarity, we need determination, and we need wisdom at the same time in tackling these very complex issues. But we need to start addressing them. We cannot escape it anymore.
I am not, it's not surprised. I'm really happy to hear this. The way you're describing it matches my my bleak assessment of where we are, and it actually points at a problem that I think you're articulating in a very appropriate way. And I'm glad you're saying it this way. Even the way you describe this economic compromised candidate versus the candidate that doesn't discuss or doesn't want to discuss politically Hezbollah's weapons. You know, a lot of good people could represent both too, and then I don't know if they would see themselves as reflecting consensus, paralysis, national unity. And that to me is part of the problem too, that decent people could unintentionally fall in those categories. And I think that goes back to my discomfort with Michel Moawad, but more that I don't know if he's so bad compared to that kind of choice, that paradigm. And I won't beat it further. It's just that I think that's where my curiosity with him comes from.
Let me say something. Okay, so whenever we have
I'm not sponsored by Michel Moawad, I promise you. He didn't want to come on the podcast.
Well,
so I got
Ibrahim Mneimneh. He missed out a lot.
He missed out, yes, exactly.
So let me tell you something. Any candidate, running for any position, okay, will have some sort of program, a vision. It's clear. This is what we vote on.
Yeah.
Okay. At the same time, there's his or her track record.
Yeah.
That can really verify if what he is proposing as a program it's really what he stands for. He or she stands for. So, for me, I mean, we need a candidate with a good track record of what he's proposing as a vision.
Yes.
For us, we were searching and seeking a president whose track record would somehow match our presidential initiative.
Yeah.
And it has to cover it's not a single subject issue, There are so many issues that we would like the president to have clear positions on. So, Hezbollah arms, we need to discuss that. Our sovereignty, we need to discuss our decision of war.
Yes.
We need to discuss the distribution of losses in the financial system. We need to discuss, and very importantly, political reforms as per Taif Accord, okay?
Yeah.
And our constitution. Yeah. We cannot escape that anymore. We don't have a sustainable political system. So, these are very essential things that we need our president to be clear on. And going back to the beginning of the podcast, I think you need some kind of a candidate who had a clear track record of that. Okay, so we can say, okay, we can wholeheartedly adopt and endorse his or her candidacy, and then like fight their campaign, to push for their names.
So can you imagine?
So I mean that's what we that's what we lack in our country.
But can you imagine?
That's what we lack. We need and going back to where we started on which way to approach politics.
Mm-hmm.
What we lack is leadership with consistent positions and very strong stands on very clear problematic issues in the country. So we can say that, okay, these men and women really represent that line of politics. It doesn't mean that they are right, but at least they have clarity. And this is, we can have maybe diversity of choices in terms of political approaches, but then it will be democracy that we can choose and pick what we believe is best for our country.
It's maybe early to ask you this, but is there a political path to make that kind of a candidate the intersection? Do you see a way for that kind of name, which resonates with me, an unafraid, principled, determined man or woman that's representing the best of us? Could that be the intersection that you see happening eventually?
There is a potential. There is a potential. I'm not very ambitious. I'm not super ambitious about it.
But I'm sorry to ask it in a naive way. How does that work? Is it bringing in odd characters together that you wouldn't expect? Odd meaning that you political opponents that don't have that interest right now, but could months from now. Because I like what you're suggesting. Even if it doesn't happen, it resonates with me.
Yeah.
But I would like to make that the intersection.
Right. Well, how can I say this? I think it's not a purely local decision.
Right.
There is an element of.
So even then, it's almost like
regional players that are contributing or influencing this election. So, to be very clear and honest, I don't think it's a simple local equation, and if it would have been so, it would have been easier to predict what would happen or what would be the outcome.
Yeah.
But I think then when you have that layer, that's another layer that add complexity to this election. I think it's more difficult to predict or forecast what kind of profile would emerge from that election.
But you're holding out that could be possibilities.
Yes, I think it's there because we have a number of candidates, who somehow I think can represent that kind of intersection that we're talking about, and yet maintain a fairly decent position on the issues that we have mentioned.
I hope circumstances allow for someone like that to emerge. And I don't want that name to be burned as well. So I like that you're suggesting this, or offering a way of looking at it it's almost like you're offering a creative solution to this problem too. I'm going to take Baabda and go a bit back in time now to the end of the Civil War, but really about where we are right now. Last night on TV, and I've heard you say it in different places, in different ways, you are not shy to defend Taif, or at least Taif's roadmap, which is something that's never been implemented.
Absolutely.
And I'm actually, it's good to hear that louder than before. I think maybe it's not how you win elections by screaming and shouting Taif on the street. That doesn't really work. But in terms of explanation and procedure, it makes total sense. Implement Taif. And the reason I'm going down this road is because this actually attaches many things that I think draw me to a politician like you. Taif, the three main pillars. Of course, the Syrian army should leave in 93. It took them some time. Hezbollah is still armed.
Should have been, all militia arms should have been dismantled by 6 months from that point. Yeah.
And here we are in 2022. So let's leave those two huge issues on the side. Let's get to the third one, which I think is something not explored enough. A lot of us remind ourselves that Taif offers a roadmap to a merit-based parliament, which is a form of secularism within
Absolutely.
this very complicated government. I think Taif also suggests or mandates a Senate, this Majlis al-Shuyukh that never happened, which in my mind is meant to complement that merit-based parliament. So you find a way for sectarianism to function better in a separate chamber.
To limit the spread of sectarianism to all aspects of our public life. It's just limited in a Senate.
Yeah.
But
I know that's a very shallow maybe way of, maybe I'm not giving it the depth it deserves, but it's really, I think, it matches where Lebanon is in that.
We have to acknowledge sectarianism exists. We have to just somehow frame it.
I think of it more like reform it. And that means a Senate.
Yeah. Look, I don't think.
But I'm sorry.
It's an experiment. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, sorry. But I wanted to ask you, can you imagine a situation where you're in parliament and let's say this intersectional president shows up?
We have so many intersections here.
But let's say this kind of a candidate is now in Baabda, and somehow a prime minister that's more reflective of October 17 replaces Najib Mikati. And Jamil al-Sayed is not speaker. Someone else is. That's, in a way, again, reflective of reform. Do you see that as the path towards implementing Taif, where you would see a merit-based parliament eventually? You could see a Senate happening. The institutional reforms could start. Is that, for you, the roadmap? That this is how it happens? Or is that really just going to be on paper for the rest of our lives?
An intersectional president and a prime minister, you said who?
A reform-based... I'm thinking of all the good guys and
right.
the good girls. And finally, Taif is now being discussed. I have this feeling that Taif will never be implemented.
It's listen. I think it is. It's
32
our
years
fight.
later.
It's our fight as Lebanese people.
Yeah.
Okay, so there are people before us who put together the Taif.
Yeah.
With all its
baggage,
and loopholes and anything you want.
Yeah.
Okay, it's still a good start.
Mm-hmm.
It's still a good start.
That's a good way of describing it. A good start.
It's definitely a good start. And unfortunately, I think what's being promoted about Taif and the bad reputation it has, it's because this political establishment had distorted the idea of Taif intentionally. Because, Ronnie, in Taif, there was some kind of a timeline.
Yeah.
Okay, so the first elections would happen on the base of Munasafi, which is...
it's not power sharing, it's... I'll get the word.
There is a specific word for that. Okay.
Yeah.
And after that election, there was supposed to be الهيئة الوطنية للطائفية السياسية formed, headed by the president, by the Lebanese president, to abolish sectarianism through a national strategy with everybody on board, like prime minister, house speaker, and all the influential politicians in the country, etc. It was a national interest to push for that. And this, unfortunately, Munasafi, which was supposed to be a temporary measure, so you just create a balance, so you're able to go further and abolish sectarianism. It remained at that point, and the establishment tried somehow to equate Taif with this Munasafi, and disregarded everything else, in the Taif. So it became all about this. And now when people speak of Taif, they don't understand that it was our road to a civil state or a secular state, and they think that it is about Munasafi.
Right, but you're right, and that's the roadmap that, like you said, it's a good start. We never got on that road, but if you're now an MP,
and you have Article 95 in the Constitution that speaks of the
get the word now.
I'm not getting it. That's the problem with the English podcast. توزيع الطائفي
sectarian division.
Yeah,
But
and
the quotas.
institutions. Yeah,
yeah,
exactly.
Yeah. That journey, is that something you see as part of your own cause for change?
Absolutely.
Okay, so how does that work long term? I'm trying to see how this picks up within Parliament, and that there's like-minded MPs that see it the way you do. Because I don't hear this enough in terms of legislation or even in terms of reform. That Taif.
Well, we need to build enough political power to push for these reforms. It's not enough that we have them in the constitution or on paper. We've had them for the past since 1990. 1989.
Yeah, that's our life. Our lives have been
exactly.
Have been
so
defined
33
by
years.
Yeah,
33 years.
Yeah.
Now it's time to push for these, but this will not push on their own. To push for reform, we have to build enough political power. Okay, and this is our fight. It's good that we have the constitution and Taif with these reforms because it's already established, and the Lebanese do not have to go back and discuss that anymore. Right. So that at least we agree on this.
Do you think that's part of the reason why, and I'm not being hard on anybody that was running in the elections, but more that there was this hesitation for more of the voters that didn't vote for change, that they didn't feel comfortable in their heaviness, that is sectarianism. Because everything you're saying is the way I understand this country too. And I'm going to offer an analogy. We're roughly the same age. Actually,
we are.
You're 46?
Yeah, that's true.
I'm 41. So we're the same generation.
Okay, same generation.
You look better at 46 than I do at 41. That's actually
man.
a big problem. You're in shape and you're all over the place, and I'm deteriorating. Yeah, but we're the same. We know the worst years. We're old enough to know what the 1980s were like. Also, there's something that I read recently. It's an article that was written, I think, right after you won, in L'Orient Le Jour, and your quote in there. It's almost like my own political awakening, except you're 5 years ahead. That you come back to this country in the 90s, and this future movement just doesn't really work for you.
That's true.
I feel the same. I felt the same way. It felt out of step with my understanding of Beirut, and I'm a bit romantic. I still think of the Ras Beirut, AUB, urban planning crowd, even when I don't agree with a lot of what maybe has been said in the last years of politics. I'm still more drawn to that kind of activism, that kind of local activism, where sectarianism is not even discussed. That secularism matches more our day-to-day lives. And it's a bit too romantic, but the reason I'm saying it this way is I think of my relationship to Lebanon as very individual, and I know over time that sectarianism is real and it's heavy and it's going to last well beyond my life, and that no matter what I do about it, no matter what I say about it, there is that huge elephant in the room that's not Hezbollah. But I've come to terms with it in a way where, and I'm going to be a little sort of testy here, I don't want him to come back. I don't want Saad Hariri to leave Abu Dhabi. I want him to stay there. Actually, I think he wants to stay there too. I don't want him in the Sarai. I don't want to know that I don't want to, that the plane trackers, I don't want to see a flight heading here. And yet, I know he is still the most popular politician of that confession. And that gravity defines that, not me. And sorry, I'll go one step further. I'll say this.
Yeah.
As much as I was drawn to the street activism of what was Beirut Medinati and all of the October 17 parties that didn't really talk about Taif, they were talking about change and reform and revolution. Saad Hariri's gone, and suddenly there's a void that you can't escape. Now, I'm mixing my intimate life, the way I see it in this country. I'm projecting onto you. Maybe you don't see it this way, but I can't shake that out of me, and I still think of that as where gravity and politics in this country meet.
I think in politics, you really don't have to do everything. There's a whole there's a whole lot of world outside who will do many things that are beyond your control. And in that sense, I mean, Ibrahim, the believer here, is speaking.
Yeah, sure. No, that's yeah.
It's. I think that we have to do everything in our powers to push for what we believe is better for our country. Okay. What happens outside and change is something beyond our control.
Yeah.
But it will happen eventually. Inevitably, it will happen. No, because nothing stays the same. So you just stand your ground, keep pushing. Okay, an opportunity would rise somehow. You take advantage of it. You didn't create that opportunity, but you sure stand there to wait for it.
Yeah,
and that's how you go. And you continue working until another opportunity, and you just continue accumulating and building. And this is what's really leading to change, not really seizing one opportunity and taking advantage of it and putting everything on your shoulders in that regard. You just have to do everything you can.
I mean, I'm going to go all the way here. I know his career ended in respective failure, political failure. Yet, I don't think anyone, had they tried to navigate this paralyzed system, I don't think they would have been able to do more. The alternative would have been to get out of politics and resign.
I don't like these hypothetical questions.
Yeah, I'm sorry. No, but I'm trying to.
This is kind of.
What I'm trying to do is measure. You said earlier, expectations should be toned down a bit because too much is being thrown on the 13.
Expectations should match what can.
Right.
What these can deliver. What these guys can deliver.
So is it fair then to suggest that anyone in the current system as we understand it is going to be facing the same kind of walls?
Absolutely.
That someone like him faced.
Yeah, that means this is a very important point, and it's not really about evaluating a political experience or political experiment like Saad Hariri, Rafiq Hariri, any politician, any politician. It's not about saying it was a good or bad experience. It delivered, it did not deliver. I think it's way much more complex to discuss. It would take books to really evaluate and get all the facts together so you can see what kind of choices one's had before him. But at the end of the day, for us as Lebanese people, and this is what I always say before all the political establishment parties, there is a political responsibility. Whether you deliver or not deliver, whether you did good, at the end of the day, when you are in a public office, you are responsible. You are in a political position. You are responsible somehow, one way or the other. You share part of this responsibility. And this is why when you find yourself not delivering, you're expected to leave.
So resignation matches responsibility in that sense.
Absolutely.
I agree. And actually, I think that was a missed opportunity for many of these politicians that did not deliver but rode a wave that was crashing towards the last 3 years.
Right.
So I share that sentiment too. I think resignation should be taken as something good when it's necessary. And I think there's almost like a climate of shame or failure surrounding it. I don't think that's the case.
This is what happened with Michel Moawad. You would expect someone who rose the expectations so high.
Yeah.
that when they became like Taif Watani, when they are in power, they started saying they wouldn't allow us. "Makhalluna."
Yeah.
What are you waiting for? Just leave if you're not able to deliver.
I know this is now a bit historic, but it makes sense because it's his last day today. I would have rather seen an independent Michel Moawad leaving the March 14 coalition in 2005 and staying independent, or resigning but being a symbolic opposition, adding to the problems or paralyzing the process further. I think is what a lot of these leaders did over time. They entrenched themselves in paralysis, and that's a generation. And I try not to be too hard on the usual suspects, unless they overstayed their political career.
I think you can be hard on everyone.
Well, I'll give you one analogy. Saad al-Shami right now, the deputy prime minister. I think anyone in his shoes would end up in the same situation. I don't think it's his competence that's the problem. As far as I know, I don't think he seems to be good at his job, but I don't think that job is meant for Lebanese politics.
Like, for this particular example, when you come into office, or you take a position like a minister or anything, you certainly need some kind of political background and maturity to be able to evaluate if this would be a successful, if this is a reasonable opportunity that you should take on, or adventure that you should be taking on.
Yeah.
Because you will be responsible no matter what.
Yeah.
You are responsible. Even if it's not your full responsibility, you will be part of a cabinet that is responsible.
Right. Yeah.
So you cannot escape that.
Yeah.
This is politics, and this is how this is public office means.
No, I'm glad you emphasize resignation as an honorable choice when
it is when you find that you are in a deadlock and you cannot deliver, you should leave the room for someone else to try. You just don't take the country hostage and just because makhalluna and I need to continue and going on.
So that's a nice segue to the last topic, taking the country hostage. It's a great title because that's what I wanted to end it with. I know that your belief in Taif Agreement is unshakable. I know that you've not been I've never heard you say we need to get rid of Taif Agreement. I think you still believe that this man's position is untainted, and he seems to be a competent judge, unable to do his job for over a year. So Taif Agreement is still paralyzed in his job. I think of him as the state trying to do its job, unable to do its job because of a burden placed on anyone trying to do that job. Let's go back to 2008. Were you living in okay, so we both know Beirut in 2008. These words became toxic later, but forget March 14 or March 8. It's the Lebanese state trying to do its job. There's infrastructure being potentially removed, a security component within the airport trying to be dislodged, and then you have a 3-week mini civil war. I still think of that as the state trying. I see the state and I see change today as both being held hostage, and I think of it as one and the same. For me, Taif Agreement is October 17, and he's reform, and he's actually competency. He's the kind of person I would want if Lebanon was supposed to carry that huge burden of investigating the port blast. But he can't do his job. So, can't blame MPs for not doing more than what they've done. And I think all of the MPs I've met have lost a lot of they're so emotional because they've been dealing with so much pain, and they have to meet the victims and the families, and I think this is the hardest job right now, is to try to represent a moment where you can stand up for Taif Agreement, defend the victims, and try to offer something in the future. But I see all of that as all of us being held hostage.
Mm.
Maybe I see it more in that the geopolitical climate you described.
Mm.
You can't just ask Hezbollah to divorce itself from Iran and join the club. But I think of that relationship and I think of security issues as a giant chunk of that hostage-like situation. And how do MPs tackle this? Today, later, I mean, I don't know how an MP would be able to offer legislation around this.
Okay, so this kind of question is, I think going back to the MPs and what they can deliver, and acknowledging the limitation of MPs as sole political driver in this country for change. It is very limited. At the end of the day, 13, 16 in whole parliament. So for such complicated issues to be addressed, of course, an MP would need to play the role as a parliamentarian in terms of accountability and legislation. And of course, this can be the particular issue, taking the country hostage on so many levels: judiciary, security, foreign policy, etc. This also can be addressed through parliamentarians, but this is one component of the battle. There's a whole lot of fronts that you need to be doing the battle at the same time. That's why I go back to what I said earlier regarding having this political framework that can really organize and create a significant power to counterbalance the other parties who are taking the country hostage, and create a serious popular force. And this would be the leverage with which you can confront and start to untangle this complicated issue, and releasing our country from its hostage. It's not just us, even that, and acknowledging the geopolitical component. Okay, of course, no one is gonna say today you can resolve the issue of Hezbollah and its arms. I mean, to be realistic. But what we need is to have a strong stand, be clear about it, open serious discussion, be transparent about it, not go and strike deals, on its account.
Is this the opportunity for the Change Bloc to work with those other MPs that share that sentiment? Or is this going to be, in your mind, something that you build from today to the next elections?
It's both.
It's both.
Yeah, okay. I think. What we always said is that we will always have intersections. With other parties. Pardon me. With other parties on different issues. And if there is a legislation or anything that can be done in parliament that can create an intersection with other political parties.
So this is that kind of intersection.
You can have that intersection. Of course, that's what's parliament about. But in my opinion, to have this, and on many other aspects that can be holding the country hostage, like the banking system that we have now, we need to have a bigger force. They are so strong. We need to organize. We need to put our efforts together. We need to have a clear political agenda and positions from the different issues. We need to foster new leaderships, younger generation leaderships. There's so much work to be done. We need our own media outlets. There's so much work to be done so you can have sufficient power.
Is there any advantage of the 13 to initiate that type of legislation, even if it doesn't go far, but that there's legacy building? I'll give you an analogy. It's an unpopular take maybe, but let's say that now that the maritime boundary has been more or less set in stone, regardless of Line 29's official sort of whether or not that is the official line aside, that the current boundaries probably with us for the rest of our lives. That maybe legislation could be offered where citizens get the profits. It's a bold type of legislation. It may not even work.
I read that.
Yeah, it may not, let's say it goes nowhere, right? But that the 13 are on record saying this state, as it exists, the politicians we know and these shell companies don't deserve one fresh dollar, wala one fresh lira, wala one shi.
Absolutely.
Okay, so that kind of legislation, 13 sign on, nobody else signs on, but it's on record that the 13,
We've done this already.
Okay, so, but...
That's not for this particular
for
issue.
Profits, right,
Not for this particular issue, but like, for example, line 29.
Yeah, right.
There was a draft law that was proposed in the last General Assembly, and nobody, I'm not sure if Kataib voted with us. I think Kataib. I will not go. But the big traditional parties, no, none of them.
Okay.
None of them voted for it.
Okay, so it dies in Parliament, but
this creates a political position. It clarifies their political. It exposes their political position. That's what's important.
So could that kind of bolder way of looking?
I think that's a very important tool.
Could that be used to try to address a geopolitical nightmare, knowing that it's not going to go far, knowing that nobody will sign on to it the way it exists, but the 13 are on record for standing up to something even the Lebanese forces wouldn't sign. I think that is something that's quite bold. And is there any, do you see that happening at least the next 4 years? And I
think it's very plausible.
I think legacy
suggestion. I think it should be worked, but I think what you need to do is really be very smart in choosing the subject, what you can address, and how to convert it into a proper legislation, because sometimes it can be dismissed for technical aspects. You have to be very professional in how you present it and how you push for it and how you campaign for it as well. Because it needs a kind of a campaign or media campaign that accompany that approach. So it has multiplier effect on
and then people know
the position that they take.
And I think also people then realize that MPs, even with their internal difficulties, the way we started talking, that even then they're still trying to do the right thing, given the context that they're in. I think they win, and I think long term that's a winning strategy. And I think
it's a very important point.
I hope you run in 4 years, but in the next 4 years, I'd like to see an independent, minded, change defending MP shine. So I really hope there is a better 4 years ahead than the last very difficult years we've both lived through. I trust your judgment. I like watching you on TV. I like listening to you. We said it before recording. You have a gifted voice for this medium. You should do your own podcast. I will say that as somebody who has listened to hundreds of Lebanese politicians now, or self-proclaimed politicians, you're among the more blunt but diplomatic. And I think I should start recording at 9 o'clock because this was the calmest, gentlest, most diplomatic conversation I've ever had. There was no friction whatsoever.
I think
9 o'clock.
It was 9 o'clock.
9 o'clock tea, and we're both exhausted from the day, so it's perfect. That's how I should do it.
Maybe we should do this more often.
Even later. Ibrahim, thank you.
Thank you so much, Ronnie, for having me. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.